Hello there, and welcome to the Election Assistance Commission's Effective Poll Worker Training Series. We know you have a busy schedule, so thank you for taking the time to complete this training. Let's get started. In this training, you'll learn useful strategies that will help you recognize common ways poll workers prefer to learn, use a variety of methods to engage and train poll workers, and review and improve poll worker training using a variety of data. We recognize that election offices across the country are incredibly diverse, with different needs and available resources. What works well in one jurisdiction may not make sense in another. With this in mind, this training is meant to provide informed insights, practical recommendations, and useful resources. It is not meant to set strict rules on how you should train or manage your poll workers. Throughout this training, you will be given several opportunities to think about and write down ways to use what you're learning so that it makes sense for your community. We'll also ask you a few questions to make sure you understand and to provide you with feedback. First, let's talk about why we are focusing on poll workers. On Election Day, poll workers are the face of the election office. They're responsible for what goes on in the polling place, and they may be the only live interaction voters have with election officials. Quality poll workers may also increase public trust in our elections. A study across multiple jurisdictions found that positive interactions with poll workers were linked to high confidence in ballot counting and election results. If voters considered poll workers to be excellent, they were more likely to trust that the election was fair. Given the link between competent poll workers and voter confidence, we need to ensure we set poll workers up for success. For the remainder of this training, you'll want to have a pen and paper or a note-taking device handy. If you have them, you'll also want a copy of your poll worker guide or manual, poll worker forms, checklist, or any documents that poll workers generally fill out as part of their duties, such as ballot reconciliation or chain of custody forms. And if you have an outline of your current poll worker training, you might want that too. Throughout this training, take time to reflect on the content and consider how it may inform your training. You can write down any ideas on how to incorporate what you learn into your training. Select Next to continue. Poll workers come to us with a wide range of life experiences and worldviews. Some may have a deep understanding of election processes, others may not. But making sure poll workers have what they need on Election Day is as much about how you train them as what you teach them. Researchers have found that adults learn best when they understand the importance of what they are learning, play an active role in their learning, have more than one way to learn something, learn at a time that is right for them, and feel supported and encouraged. So, what does this mean in practice? Select each image to learn how these factors might impact your training. Adults learn best when they understand the importance of what they are learning. In other words, poll workers need to know why they are learning something. Like you, poll workers are busy. They have jobs, families, hobbies, and other priorities on their minds. They don't want to spend too much time learning new information unless they think it will be useful. This makes sense. In the demanding world that we live in, no one wants to invest time in learning without seeing its value. So, when training poll workers, always start with the why. Why is this important to know? How will it help them achieve their goals? What problem does it help them solve? This is especially important when the reason isn't obvious. For example, consider the process of tracking the chain of custody of ballots. Carefully documenting every time a sealed ballot bag is moved may seem tedious to a poll worker who doesn't understand why it's required. But if poll workers understand that chain of custody forms help prove the ballots were always secured and have not been tampered with, they'll see why it's so important. Explaining that the chain of custody forms are like receipts Showing that the ballots were always secured and handled correctly makes it easier for people to understand why documenting sealed numbers and who secured and transported a ballot bag is important. In this example, knowing the why helps generate willingness to learn how to properly complete chain of custody forms. Think about your poll workers and any recent training sessions or elections. Is there a task that you had trouble getting poll workers to complete or take seriously? As you plan the next training on this topic, how might you explain the why behind this task to help them understand its importance? Some things you can explain to help poll workers understand the why include how the task supports a larger goal or the next step in the election process, what can happen if the task is not completed correctly, the problem the task solves when completed correctly, and any other benefits of completing the task correctly. Be sure to use words and examples that your poll workers will understand. Connecting the task to a similar task outside of elections will help, as in the use of having receipts or proof. Select Next to continue. Now it's time to check your understanding. Read the question and answer choices and select your answer. Then select Submit. Adults learn best when they play an active role in their learning. Adults are usually self-directing in all areas of their lives, including learning. So instead of expecting or allowing poll workers to just sit and listen during a training session, build in opportunities for poll workers to share their experiences and actively participate. You will find that poll workers will have insights and experiences they can share that will benefit the entire group, especially if they have been a poll worker before. To support active participation and sharing, ask meaningful, open-ended questions rather than questions that can be answered with yes or no. For example, instead of asking poll workers if the accessible voting device must be turned on and operational when the polling location opens, ask, why is it important for the accessible voting device to be turned on and operational at the start of the day? What might happen if it isn't? Open-ended questions encourage dialogue, active listening, and reflection between and among you and the poll workers. Instead of being the sage on stage or the all-knowing teacher, allow poll workers to share responses first. For example, if you get a common question during a question and answer session, ask if experienced poll workers in the audience can offer an answer. After they have shared a response, you can then offer an answer. You can acknowledge and build on their answer by offering additional need-to-know information. After training on a topic, check your learners' knowledge by offering a scenario and asking participants to talk through how they would respond. Have them share their responses with the person next to them before sharing out with the entire group to help them feel more comfortable. When there is a misunderstanding or if a poll worker provides wrong information, gently redirect by saying, "Let's check that in the poll worker manual." Always remember to keep any feedback respectful and helpful. When you create opportunities for poll workers to participate and share their experiences in these ways, you reinforce their ability to process and learn new information while also demonstrating that their experience and participation is valuable. Now that you know that poll workers learn best when they play an active role in their learning, how can you use this knowledge to transform training for your poll workers? Are there opportunities for you to do less talking and more listening so that participants can share their experiences and play a more active role in their learning? Some things you can do include asking more open-ended questions throughout a session, allowing experienced poll workers to share their responses before you share, modeling using the poll worker training manual when clarification is needed, and pausing to ask poll workers to discuss information or processes with the person sitting next to them. Select Next to continue. Now it's time to check your understanding. Read the question and answer choices and select your answer. Then select Submit. Poll workers and other adult learners learn best when they have more than one way to take in new information. Searching for a single best way to train on a topic should be avoided because it doesn't really exist. What makes perfect sense to one poll worker may not make any sense to the next poll worker. With this in mind, poll worker training must provide more than one way to access and interact with the information or skills being taught. Try your best to engage multiple senses before, during, and after poll worker training. For example, when providing training on checking in a voter, you may show how to check in a voter with a flowchart or a video clip. When using videos with audio, always include a transcript and closed captions for learners who take in information best by reading. In addition, include relevant images to help explain important information. After playing a video clip or walking through a flowchart, you may stage a live demonstration. During the demonstration, ask the poll workers to write down the steps they see while an experienced poll worker verbally explains what is happening. Follow this with a question and answer session. Ask, what do we do first, second, third, and so on, to help them recall what they have learned. Also ask, what questions do we have? Then give poll workers a chance to practice themselves by role-playing a voter check-in with the person in the seat next to them. Follow this up by asking, what questions do we still have? To give learners an additional opportunity to have their questions answered. You may wish to ask a few open-ended what-if questions to ensure poll workers understand the importance of each step in the process. To end the training session, you might encourage poll workers to think about how they will use what they are learning in their unique roles. Asking a question like, how will you use this information on Election Day? And encouraging them to discuss and record their responses will go a long way in making the training stick. Training experiences need to provide different ways to learn. Learners should be able to see, hear, write, interact, and practice. Having different ways to interact with the content reinforces learning and makes it memorable. When learning is memorable, it is more likely to be implemented in the way desired. Thinking of your poll worker training, is there a task that you tend to teach in only one way? As you plan your next training, how might you use a variety of approaches to ensure the learning sticks? Some things you can include are video clips, flowcharts, interviews, live demonstrations, role plays, question and answer sessions, peer-to-peer discussions, images with explanations, easy-to-understand written information, worksheets where trainees can fill in blanks as they learn a process. Including a variety of ways to learn and interact with information helps poll workers increase their knowledge and skills. Select Next to continue. Now it's time to check your understanding. Read the question and answer choices and select your answer. Then select Submit. Adults learn best when the training process is positive and encouraging. It is very important to encourage your poll workers. All the rules, procedures, and technology can be overwhelming. So acknowledge that and be your poll workers' biggest cheerleader. Do your best to help poll workers feel comfortable asking questions. Establish a buddy system for support if possible, and always remember to remain calm and pleasant even in the face of challenges. Some ways to offer support and encouragement during the training process have already been discussed and include encouraging questions and discussions and making sure everyone feels comfortable participating, letting poll workers know what they are doing well and where they can improve, and doing so in a respectful, helpful way, giving poll workers responsibilities during training that can help them feel valued, incorporating real-life examples and scenarios in the training that helps poll workers understand the importance of their role and how they can effectively handle various situations, making the training interactive and engaging by including activities, group discussions, and role-playing scenarios to make learning more enjoyable and less monotonous, keeping lines of communication open by encouraging them to share their thoughts and concerns, and being responsive to their feedback. Other ways to be supportive and encouraging include acknowledging their efforts and achievements, no matter how small. A simple thank you or well done can go a long way in boosting morale. Ensuring that the training schedule includes regular breaks and is conducted in a comfortable environment. This helps maintain energy levels and focus. Providing small incentives like certificates, badges, or even light refreshments during training. All of these can serve as motivation. As you plan your next training session, identify specific ways to encourage poll workers and create a supportive environment. Select Next to continue. Now it's time to check your understanding. Read the question and answer choices and select your answer. Then select Submit. Adults learn best when they learn at a time that is right for them. In other words, your poll workers will learn more and be less distracted when the timing of training fits their own schedules. Offering training at different times and on different days will allow poll workers to choose a time that works best for them, especially since they might have other equally important priorities. Another way to allow learners to learn at a time that is right for them is to enhance in-person training with additional resources such as online videos that can be watched at any time, virtual office hours where poll workers can ask questions directly, open house style sessions where poll workers can get more hands-on practice using equipment, a copy of the poll worker manual or quick reference guides to take home, and online surveys or quizzes to help poll workers check their knowledge. You can also utilize just-in-time training by providing poll workers the knowledge they need right when they need it. This can take the form of short checklists provided in the polling place itself or your Election Day hotline or help desk. In addition, you can compile links to resources for learners to refer to before or after training to practice a training topic. Having different ways to interact with the content before, during, or after training reinforces learning. Select Next to continue. Now it's time to check your understanding. Read the question and answer choices and select your answer. Then select Submit. So far, we have discussed some of the core factors involved in training effective poll workers. Considering the many duties they have and the numerous rules and procedures they must learn, we expect a lot from them. Training poll workers on everything at once can be excessive, and they will not remember everything. This could lead to them feeling overwhelmed. So what can you do? You can focus on what is most important. In the final segment of this training, we will focus on planning poll worker training to include only the most essential information. To do this, you will identify tasks that poll workers must do on Election Day, list questions poll workers are likely to have, update documentation to reflect changes in laws and procedures, and gather data from other sources to inform training. Let's start by identifying what poll workers must be able to do on Election Day. Select Next to continue. Think through a typical day at the polls in your community. What are the most important things a poll worker will need to do? Those could be specific tasks like opening and closing polls or checking in voters. These could also be more general tasks like getting to the polling location on time with your lunch and water bottle or treating every voter with respect. Pause the video now to write down a list of tasks that poll workers must be able to do before, on, and after Election Day. Great! Did your before Election Day task include setting up the polling place using the layout provided? Did your on Election Day task include serving voters with disabilities, following procedures, and making the right choices during an emergency? Did your after Election Day task include completing post-election surveys? Next, you'll want to narrow down your list of topics by identifying the most important tasks that require hands-on practice. You might think about and highlight common tasks that everyone will have to do, such as serving voters with disabilities, using equipment and documentation, completing chain of custody, ballot reconciliation, and accounting forms, and completing a post-election survey. One of the most important things to include in your list is finding information. Poll workers must know where to find help when they are unsure of what to do. This includes looking up information in a poll worker manual when they have a question, knowing who to call for assistance with specific types of issues that might come up, and understanding the chain of command. They should know who they should ask first and who they should escalate an issue to if the first person doesn't know. It may be helpful to describe Election Day like an open book test where it is okay to call someone for help or to refer to the training manual. Be sure to include opportunities to reference the manual and other resources during scenarios and role plays. Select Next to continue. Even if poll workers have completed all the required training, they will still have questions on Election Day. You'll want to plan for these and make a note on where to find the answers. Start by thinking about common questions you think your poll workers will have on Election Day. If you've been gathering data from calls to your help desk on Election Day or from poll worker surveys, you may already have a few unusual or frequently asked questions in mind. If not, just take your best guess. Go ahead and pause the video now to write down a few questions poll workers may have. Great! Here are some questions we have seen in the past. What do I do if a voter moved? How do I issue a provisional ballot? Who do I call at the elections office if I have a question and cannot find the answer? Now, with the timer on hand, take your poll worker manual and see how long it takes you to find the answer to just one of these questions. Decide which question you will research, start the timer, and stop it once you have found the answer. Pause the video and do this now. Great! Was the answer to the question easy to find? Was the table of contents and organization of the manual clear? If not, make a note of what needs to improve and plan to make these changes before giving the manual to your poll workers. Also, consider other resources that can provide answers to questions. Consider making flipbooks or process-specific cheat sheets available so that poll workers can find information faster. Guides that help poll workers use any Election Day equipment should also be made available. It is best to have someone who did not write the material test them. Once all written instructions you plan to provide have been tested, be sure to give poll workers plenty of practice locating information before Election Day. Select Next to continue. Now it's time to check your understanding. Read the question and answer choices and select your answer. Then select Submit. Once you have identified what poll workers must be able to do, look for things that may need to be updated in your existing training materials. It is important to review your poll worker training content before conducting a training session to ensure that you are delivering correct information to poll workers. Before a training session, remember to update the rules for each type of election before that election takes place. Also review, verify, and update changes to laws or procedures, changes in equipment or technology, and changes made to address previous issues or problems. If you have a lot of returning poll workers, be sure to highlight common practices that have changed since the previous election year. Before moving on, take a moment to think about changes that impact poll workers in some way. Are there any changes since the last election that must be communicated to poll workers? If any changes need to be made, remember to make the changes across all documents and training materials that reference the outdated information. Select Next to continue. Now it's time to check your understanding. Read the question and answer choices and select your answer. Then select Submit. It is always a good idea to gather feedback from poll workers to learn how you can improve your training and to use this data to help make decisions about the training process. At the end of training, have poll workers complete a feedback survey. You can provide a paper copy or a link to a feedback form for poll workers to complete before leaving the training session. Post-training questions should focus on trainees' reactions to the training and what they learned. This data can be used to help create a more supportive and encouraging training process. The EAC Clearinghouse website includes a sample post-training survey with useful questions along with other resources to help you train poll workers. In addition to an end-of-training feedback survey, you can also survey poll workers after Election Day. Post-election survey questions should focus on how well poll workers applied what they learned and identify areas where poll workers might need more or different coverage given their experience. Use this data to improve how the content is delivered. For example, feedback may be used to improve scenarios. Other feedback might suggest that learners need more or different ways to practice. Other data that you can use to improve poll worker training can come from help desk calls on Election Day and incident logs from polling places. The actual outcomes from Election Day will also provide valuable data. Take note of any issues as well as what worked well and what needs to improve. If you tried implementing new changes, note whether they were effective. Taking into consideration both the survey feedback and actual outcomes from Election Day, revisit your training objectives and strategies and update them each election year. Select Next to continue. Now it's time to check your understanding. Read the question and answer choices and select your answer. Then select Submit. In this training, you learned about understanding the learning needs of poll workers and how to plan effective poll worker training. You should now be able to recognize common ways poll workers prefer to learn, use a variety of methods to engage and train poll workers, and review and improve poll worker training using a variety of data. As always, thank you for your work in elections.